August 26, 1944. This week comes the liberation of Paris. Wait. Okay. That does happen this week, yeah. But something else does that is way, way more important to the course of the war. A real game changer. I'll get there in a minute. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the battlefronts in the north of the Eastern Front settled down after a failed German counterattack, though the Soviets have reached the East Prussian border. The Allies invaded France for a second time, now along the south coast, and met little resistance, and that still-going first invasion devastated the enemy near Falaise Argentan, and the Allies closed in on the Seine and Paris. In Paris came a partisan uprising, and in German-occupied Warsaw, the Polish uprising continued as well. As it does this week. Stalin simply recorded an unpalatable truth when, on the 22nd of August, he stated somewhat raspingly that, from the military point of view, the situation which keeps German attention riveted to Warsaw is highly unfavorable both to the Red Army and to the Poles. But by that time, he had also formally and fiercely disassociated himself and the Soviet command from the Warsaw Adventure, thus consigning the Polish insurgents to inevitable death and inescapable destruction. Stalin has more to say, actually, even calling the leaders of the uprising power-hungry criminals. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt says the 24th that without being able to use Soviet airfields, which was rejected last week, he can't do much anything in the way of supplying the Poles. And today tells Winston Churchill that sending another joint message to Stalin is not good for long-term wartime prospects. But if Churchill wants to intervene, then, go ahead. Okay, here's a general summary of where the Eastern Front stands as this week begins. The defeat of Army Group Center, the seizure of vital bridgeheads on the western bank of the Vistula, and the advance to the outskirts of Warsaw, the result of the giant offensive waged by 5 Soviet fronts, pushed the Soviet armies as much as 350 miles along the road to Berlin. Berlin was now less than 400 miles away. 2 out of the 4 major German concentrations, Army Group Center and North Ukraine, were fiercely mauled in the battles which sucked in more than 6 million men on both sides and employed 85,000 guns and over 11,000 tanks or assault guns, supported by over 10,000 aircraft. Of these 70 German divisions, facing 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Belarusian and 1st Baltic fronts, 30 were obliterated from the German order of battle, and 30 more immolated in Koniev's drive with 1st Ukrainian Front to the Vistula. German formations were encircled 5 times. The Soviet front advanced to run from the west of Jelgava to Shaolyai, Suwalki, Ostrolenka, Pulutsk, onto the Warsaw suburb of Praga, to Magnushev, Sandomierz, Drohobych, and finally to the junction with 2nd Ukrainian Front at Chernovici, the line to which the offensive finally subsided in August. At the end of the month, the Stavka ordered all 5 fronts onto the defensive. We saw last week that the Soviet fronts further north are now regrouping and planning for new offensives. But what about 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts to the south? Well, this week they invade Romania. Yep. On the 20th, with 2 big offensives near Iași and Tiraspol. 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts are hitting 3rd and 4th Romanian and German 6 armies. Rodion Malinovsky's 3rd Ukrainian Front's preliminary barrage does heavy damage, then Soviet 27th and 52nd armies drive 15 kilometers into the enemy defenses along a 25-kilometer front. The armor comes in at noon and hits the 3rd defense line. By day's end, 5 divisions have been destroyed. The Romanian troops are crumbling, and there is nothing the Germans can do about it. Fyodor Tolbukhin's 4th Ukrainian Front also breaks through the 20th, taking the major junction Kaushani. The 21st, Malinovsky commits more force. The Romanians between Iași and Targu Frumos have collapsed, and Soviet troops are heading down the Prut Valley. The armor has advanced 80 kilometers. It's heading south, and the German forces are being flanked from both east and west. Tolbukhin's forces also break through. The enemy disintegrates before them, and his guys are soon crossing the Dniester in several places. On the 22nd, Jassy is abandoned by the Axis. German 6th Army wants to try and save itself, but Tolbuchen's 2 mechanized corps hit the rear of 3 full corps from 6th Army. They actually lose touch with the whole army group Dumitrescu. The Axis cannot save themselves now by withdrawal. They are 80 kilometers from the Prut, and the Soviet armor is but 30. Naval infantry and the Danube flotilla are busy taking the Dniester estuary with minimal resistance. After that, Soviet 46th Army swings north and northwest around the Romanians and into the rear of Romanian 3rd Army. And even while that army is almost surrounded, German 6th Army begins disintegrating. On the 23rd, the 2 Soviet fronts link up and some 12 divisions of 6th Army are cut off. Bender is cleared by the Soviets. But about that day, 23rd of August, 1944, proved to be one of the decisive days of the entire war. The fate of an entire German army group hung in the balance. That alone, however, could not make one single day so momentous. What changed the fortunes of Germany's entire southeastern theater was the coup carried out that day in Bucharest when King Michael had the Antonescu brothers arrested and Romania ceased to fight alongside Germany. Yep, Romania has left the Axis powers, and that is going to have effects far beyond a single army group. The 2 Romanian armies lay down their arms, and with German 6th Army being strangled, southern Bessarabia, the Danube, the Carpathians, it is all open to the Soviets. Who is going to stop them? The roads into Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Austria are open. The road to Bulgaria, the road to Yugoslavia, open, all because of the coup. It was actually scheduled for the 26th, but the unfolding disaster in the field hastens the events in Bucharest. The king, only 22 years old, establishes a new government with the non-political General Constantine Sănătescu at the helm. The king's representatives in Cairo sign an armistice, and that evening he speaks to the whole world over the radio and tells them the story. Hitler is a wee bit surprised by all of this, to put it mildly. German command still hopes to pull back to a defense line that covers the Ploiești oil fields. Germany's main source of natural oil is Romania, though they make a lot of synthetic oil, and to take control of Bucharest. In King Michael's radio address, he also says Romania will join the United Nations and fight against Germany. Let that sink in. He also denounces the 1940 Treaty of Vienna, which gave part of Transylvania to Hungary, which could be seen as declaring war on Hungary, actually. On the 24th, there is heavy fighting in Bucharest. Those 6,000 German troops marching there don't get past the suburbs. But 150 German bombers do hit the city, targeting the palace and the government buildings. Meanwhile, the Soviet fronts are still advancing. Kishinev falls. Army Group South Ukraine has been completely shattered. It is a catastrophe. The Soviets have completed one encirclement ring and are working on the second one 80 kilometers out, with 18 German divisions trapped inside. And the German attacks on Bucharest have not created panic. They have not cowed the population. Rather, they cause Romanian soldiers to attack the Wehrmacht. Romania formally declares war on Germany. Today, as the week ends, the Soviets reach the Danube east of Galicia. Their main attacks are to the west between it and Focșani. Tolbuchen's forces take Kagul, and the ring around 6th Army is closed. Over 100,000 Germans have been killed on this front this week, and a similar number taken prisoner. Also, maybe some or many of those trapped German troops will break out and leave Romania. But they're damn sure not going to Bulgaria, because today on the 26th, the Bulgarian government tells the Soviet Union that from now on, Bulgaria is strictly neutral. German troops crossing into Bulgaria will be disarmed, and the Germans have been asked to remove those already there. We'll soon see what the Soviets think about Bulgarian neutrality, since they are currently cruising for the Danube. But there are a bunch of trapped Germans who may escape to fight another day over on the Western Front. Okay, The crushing of the German forces in the Falaise Pocket and beyond by August 20th brought an effective end to German resistance in Normandy, but it did not end the Normandy campaign. After Falaise, the outcome was not in doubt, but the retreating Germans had now to be pursued, and the pressure kept up until the enemy was finally defeated and their army groups ground to dust. This desirable process was brought to a halt by the old problem, supply. It's not just ammunition and fuel. Some of the Allied armies are running out of men. The numbers of killed and wounded in Normandy have been high. 2nd Canadian Infantry Division's 9 battalions should have a total of 7,389 men, but they are short 1,900. That's over a quarter. The American advance on Saint-Lô cost 40,000 casualties, and 90% of that was infantry. But the War Office had planned for 48% of casualties to be infantry, so that is an issue as well. The U.S. has plenty more men still at this point, but the growing number adds hassles to the supply chain. Still, on the 20th, George Patton's troops take crossings of the Seine at Mont-Gassicourt, 50 kilometers west of Paris. Beyond Paris, 20th Corps units enter Fontainebleau. That same day, Philippe Pétain, Vichy French head of state, is arrested by the Germans for refusing to go to an area safe from the Allied advance. There are more than 7,000 armed members of the resistance in Paris by then, and around 6,000 German troops there. The 21st comes the last efforts of trapped German soldiers to break out of the Falaise Pocket. In the Falaise battles, 50,000 Germans have been taken prisoner and 10,000 killed, but some 50,000 have escaped. By this day, all Allied armies here are advancing rapidly to the northeast, chasing the broken Germans. They are still behind the Operation Overlord timetable at this point, but the speed of the advance might correct that if this continues. Now, Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower wants the Americans to head east towards Nancy and the Saar, and the British and Canadians to head north for Antwerp and the Rhine. But Allied Ground Forces Commander Bernard Montgomery wants both the British and American army groups to head north and not be split. What transpires is Canadian 1st Army is to wheel at Rouen, head to the Channel at Le Havre, and then go up the Channel. British 2nd Army is to cross the Seine and head for the Somme, and US 12th Army Group gathers south and southwest of Paris until ordered to enter the city. Wrecking the city and infantry street battles are not on the agenda, although on the 22nd, Adolf Hitler issues the first of several orders to Dietrich von Choltitz, military governor of Paris, to destroy the city. By the 23rd, resistance forces have largely freed Paris. On the 24th, there is fighting in the city again, though, as the Germans make a final effort. Philippe Leclerc leads the French to the outskirts of the city. Colonel Pierre Bellotte enters the city with a small armored force from the Porte d'Orléans. They are welcomed by tens of thousands of people. There are still loads of German barricades and strongpoints in the city, and many people on both sides are killed. On the 25th, Leclerc's armor enters Paris just after 7 in the morning. Choltitz surrenders at 2:30 in the afternoon, having refused all of Hitler's orders to destroy the city. During the liberation of the city, over 5,000 resistance fighters have been killed and 127 regular civilians. Many collaborators have been summarily killed without trial or whatever. Today, the 26th, Charles de Gaulle, head of the provisional French government, is part of the huge ceremonial parade, despite the sniper danger. You've all seen footage of it before, probably. Here is some more.
All through this war you could expect only the unexpected. This for the triumphant return of Frenchmen to their brothers released from bondage. This for the day when Paris emerged from the shadows. There were tears and terror mingling with cheers and laughter. Death cracked his whip among the happy sightseers who welcomed the coming of a new life.
So Paris has been freed. Something else this week, though. On the 23rd, Eisenhower tells Montgomery about the change in Allied command structure to take place September 1st. Eisenhower will assume direct command of all Allied armies in France. Monty will command Army Group of the North, and Omar Bradley will command Army Group of the East. There will indeed be a push for Antwerp and the Rhine, and one for the Saar. In the field, By the evening of August 26, the overall situation was as follows. The German armies were in full retreat, but fully capable of turning back for swift and savage strikes at their pursuers. Short but sweet. All Allied armies in France has a new meaning now since the Allied invasion of southern France began last week. And it very much continues this week. On the 21st, Aix-en-Provence falls to Lucien Truscott's 6th Corps. The 23rd, French troops reach Toulon and Marseille. The 24th, the Americans take Caen on the coast and also Arles to the west. On the 25th, they take Avignon. Now, these might sound like just place names, but there's something important to point out. Remember, the Wehrmacht has 250,000 men on the 500-kilometer march to north of Dijon. But those men are not fully motorized. The Allies are. The Allies are massively equipped. The Germans have 100 tanks and a few big guns. The Wehrmacht had come to France in one of the greatest mechanized operations of all time. But the retreat to Dijon was a slow procession of long, foot-mobile road columns, a kind of double-file march with high vulnerability on both flanks, all the ingredients for catastrophe. And the places I just mentioned, Aix, Arles, Avignon, this is the Allies overtaking the Germans and taking 24,000 prisoners. They are also advancing in 2 columns, one up the Rhone Valley, one east of Grenoble. Truscott has a rapid armor exploitation force under Frederick Butler, too, and they cover nearly 300 kilometers in 4 days, with a final thrust of 100 on the 21st to swing around and take Montélimar and try to cut off the retreat of German 19th Army. Enter Wendt von Wiedersheim's 11th Panzer Division, working as both a shield from U.S. 3rd Infantry coming up from the south and a hammer against Butler's task force, who, while very mobile, are lightly armored and cannot fight a concentration of Panther tanks. 11th Panzer Division is the only mechanized one in Army Group G, and it also has 5 batteries of 88mm guns. The fighting results in a stalemate by today, and with 36 infantry making no gains, an angry Truscott arrives on the scene to relieve 36 Commander John Dahlquist, but once Truscott sees the heavy terrain and the massive destruction, he does not do so and leaves. Neither side has the upper hand as the week ends, though casualties are higher for the Germans. There's actually a new Allied offensive in Italy this week. They've spent the whole month there moving force around for the attack because the French, Moroccan, and Algerian mountain troops headed over to help with southern France. So the lack of mountain divisions has changed the Allied plans to a heavy attack up the coast instead of the center of the peninsula, which will ideally cause the Germans to shift force to the coast, and then will come an attack through the Apennines in the weakened central sector. During the planning, they looked to lessons learned from Operation Diadem to see where they might do better. Things like traffic congestion and exploitation speed came up. So Operation Olive, this operation, will ease congestion by attacking on a broader front. 3 corps on a 25-kilometer front from the Adriatic coast. Rapid exploitation was recognized as being the key to their success. Despite the numerous ridges that had to be overcome, everyone was fully aware how tantalizingly close the northern plains were and of the need to get there quickly before the summer was out. Attackers left to right are British 5th Corps, the 2 divisions of the Canadian 1st Corps, and the Polish Corps on the coast. This was not the original battle order, and I specifically mentioned the number of Canadian divisions for a reason. See, 5th Corps was supposed to attack in the center, where the hills are lower and the Via Adriatica offers the best chance of rapid pursuit exploitation. And it is the largest corps with 5 divisions. The Poles pointed out, though, that moving on the Via Adriatica is often actually slower than inland because of enemy demolitions. So 8th Army Commander Oliver Leese has switched the British and the Canadian positions, meaning the Canadians are now supposed to head up the coast road as fast as they can, but with less than half the original force of the British Corps. Also, since they're involved in the initial assault this week, they'll have no fresh armor for follow-up pursuit. And 5th Corps, with all of its tanks and trucks, will now be operating in hillier and steeper ground with really narrow roads. But by the 25th, 59,000 men and 1,122 big guns are in position. The opening barrage that day catches the enemy off guard. The Desert Air Force further savages the enemy, and 8th Army crosses the Metauro, making a solid bridgehead the 26. The 3 divisions of the 76th Panzer Corps opposite them are soon pushed back, and the week ends with the offensive trying to make a bridgehead under machine gun and mortar fire. And to the north in Italy, there is big partisan activity this week. After a 3-day fight, the fascist stronghold of Baceno falls to Italian partisans the 23rd. Within a few days, all the valleys up here near the Swiss border are under their control. And here are a bunch of notes to end the week. On the 21st, the Dunbarton Oaks Conference begins. From then to the 29th, Allied representatives discuss post-war security. They agree there should be an International Court of Justice and an Assembly of United Nations with a council of leading states. The Americans, British, and Soviets are led by Edward Stettinius, Sir Alexander Cadogan, and Andrei Gromyko, respectively. From the 22nd, Japan will conscript all women between 12 and 40 for war work. That same day, Sir Henry Moore sends 3 British carriers and 2 escort carriers and battleship Duke of York in support to attack German battleship Tirpitz at Ka Fjord. The attack is detected coming in, and the attackers are savaged by German fighters and guns. This happens again without result the 24th and 29th. On the 23rd, the British War Cabinet agrees that Jewish soldiers in Allied armies can serve in the Jewish Brigade Group, a specifically Jewish fighting force. Winston Churchill telegrams Roosevelt, "This will give great satisfaction to the Jews when it is published, and surely they, of all other races, have the right to strike at the Germans as a recognizable body. They wish to have their own flag, which is the Star of David on a white background with 2 light blue bars. I cannot see why this should not be done. Indeed, I think the flying of this flag at the head of a combat unit would be a message to go all over the world." On the 25th in Slovakia, guerrillas have taken control of Turčiansky Svatý Martin, and today Slovak garrisons in other towns have been defecting to the partisans. And there's this. The head of the German military mission to Romania is stopped in Slovakia en route to Berlin, taken from his train along with his staff and put in a barracks. If something were to happen to him, the situation in Slovakia could explode. That same day comes an Allied recon flight over Monowitz synthetic oil plant. They also photograph Auschwitz again. The Allies have had a massive bombing campaign this month against synthetic oil facilities, and it has had an effect. Secret reports have been intercepted by Bletchley that German operational activity is being ever more curtailed by the lack of available fuel. And that is the week, with an offensive beginning in Italy, but everything else being overshadowed by the liberation of Paris and the surrender and then defection of Romania. Seriously, this week begins with Romania as one of Germany's main allies and ends with Romania at war with Germany, which leaves the Soviets a world of freedom to exploit, although that's probably not a good choice of words. But Romanian King Michael tells the world, and the world rejoices, and Paris is free after 4 years, and the world rejoices. There's a lot of people killing and dying, of course. This is a world war after all. But people not just hopeful, but rejoicing. We don't see that too often. Perhaps it will continue. One can but hope so. We shall continue, at any rate, to do this series until the end of the war, whenever that may be. We do this thanks to the Time Ghost Army. You can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned officers, and Aidan O'Connell is the Army Member of the Week. And if you want to see an awesome mini-series we did that happens after this war, then check out the Indonesian War of Independence right here. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.